There are concerns over the possibility of political violence ahead of the off-cycle elections in Bayelsa, Imo, and Kogi states. Reports say although the campaign had just started, there are signs of political clashes among opposing political parties and candidates. In the midst of this, the Independent National Electoral Commission has called on security agencies to be neutral and deal decisively with perpetrators of crimes and other undemocratic offenses. National General Secretary, Center for Democracy, Olufemi Lawson, joins us now to discuss the center's advocacy against violence and the forthcoming off-season elections in Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsday. Welcome to the program.
Good afternoon.
Well, tell us a bit more about your center's advocacy against violence and the forthcoming election in the states we mentioned.
No, thank you. What is happening should be a thing of concern to every Nigerian, particularly when you look at the history of our elections and how violence, had, in most cases, altered the will of the people to elect their leaders. It is unfortunate that at the time that we're beginning to make progress in our elections, these ugly tendencies are beginning to rear their heads again in our elections. And, I've been predicting this for quite some weeks, that if decisive steps are not taken, the elections which are coming up in Bayelsa, Kogi, and Imo may likely witness incidences of violence. And now that is beginning to manifest in Bayelsa State. On like 2 occasions now, there have been violence that have been associated with the coming elections in Bayelsa State. And I think beyond the call by INEC for security agencies to take actions against perpetrators of violence, I think we must begin to work towards getting to that stage where we will criminalize really election violence in Nigeria. This keep reoccurring because it looks like everybody come during every election cycle, creates violence, unleash terror on the people, then move on to the next election because nobody's in jail, nobody's been punished for perpetrating such acts in the past. I wanted to use Bayelsa as a specific example. Our organization monitored the election in Bayelsa in 2015, in 2019, even in 2023 general elections. And you realize that because a particular group of people feels entitled, and like I said, nobody's really get punished when these things are done, then in every election cycle, you see these tendencies coming to rear its ugly face. If you remember the governorship election in 2015, INEC had to suspend the election at some point because it became totally violent. And unfortunately, we're having a coincidence in 2023 because one of the major candidates in that election is contesting this election. If you look at the 2019 election, it was not as violent as the 2015 election. So why do we wait for this time when election comes and people can no longer stay in their communities? As we speak, there are communities in Bayelsa State where people can no longer go home. There are communities, and why should election become an issue that would, disrupt people from their communities, that will unleash terror on the people? This should be a process that should be owned by the people, and not by a few politicians who become so desperate to win elections and are now unleashing terror on the people. And that is why we keep saying that we must criminalize the culture of election violence to the extent that whoever is found to have perpetrated violence during an election is made to face the law, irrespective of where you are coming from.
Desperation and impunity are definitely the 2 words that encompass any type of election season in the country, unfortunately. Sure. You were talking about some decisive steps being taken. Could you elaborate with us some of those key decisive steps that should already have been implemented, or if they haven't been implemented, need to be looked into? Well,
over the time, we've proposed that there should be special tribunal that will deal with election issues in Nigeria, not election disputes as in the result of elections, but that will deal with electoral crime in Nigeria. We should not necessarily wait for the conventional court to deal with perpetrators of election violence. In 2015, aftermath of that election, a lot of lives were lost, properties were destroyed. There was a judicial commission of inquiry into that incident. But as we speak, if anybody is in court, that will be the conventional court. As we speak, 8 years after, nobody has been punished. And that has given more, gut to politicians to come back and reenact violence. Like I said, why we had minimal cases in 2019 was because possibly the culture or the character of the candidates in that election. But in this election, it's beginning to take another ugly trend. And what is happening in Bayelsa State is of concern, particularly because, if you look at the state in the last 3.5 years or thereabout, there has been peace, possibly because of the kind of leadership that has been in charge of the state in the last 3.5 years. Bayelsa has been out of the news for very negative reasons of crisis, violence, and hostilities. But today, Bayelsa is coming back to the news because of the desperation, of some politicians to win election at all costs. And I think the federal government, INEC, and even the state government must be decisive in ensuring that whoever perpetrates violence, whoever unleashes terror on the people, is made to face the full wrath of the law. We can no longer continue to play with the peace of the people just because politicians want to occupy positions.
Well, definitely, but I'm wondering how far advocacy can really go in giving us free and fair elections. For instance, the government of the day has discarded reports criticizing the conduct of the 2023 general election. The police, at a time when they are supposed to maintain, security, law and order, they are usually found wanting. INEC also has its own faults. So by the time you put all the challenges we are facing in Nigeria, how well can advocacy work?
It will definitely work, because from time, you must understand that there is no government anywhere or institutions of state that can guarantee, free and fair process of election, that can guarantee credibility of elections. It is usually the people in their decisive will that will ensure that this kind of processes are made to work properly. And you cannot undermine the role of the media and the civil society in this. That what we have today that is still a bit civil, a bit democratic, and a bit orderly in our election is the role of the media and the civil society majorly. Left to politicians, we would have gone far worse than what we're currently experiencing. So we must sustain the advocacy. A lot is going on across the states where these elections are going to be held. And the media has been doing a lot of fantastic job, in also ensuring that we educate the people on the need to ensure that they don't allow themselves to be used by desperate politicians to distort peace of their communities, because after elections, they will still come back to those communities to live together. So it must be a sustained effort. But like I said, neither the security agencies nor the government will provide this if the people sit back and do not make the specific demand.
And I know that you're the National General Secretary for the Center of Campaign for Democracy, and you've been doing quite a bit of work in terms of trying to make sure everything goes well in Bayelsa, Kogi, Imo, and Edo. Could you tell us a little bit more about your work and the challenges maybe that are faced in trying to carry out your duties?
Well, majorly we've been doing a lot of pre-election engagement. In Bayelsa, we've worked with some research groups like CellHub, that has been collating data about what may likely emerge during the election. For instance, the issue of violence, CellHub has predicted over 70% likelihood of violence in this election. INEC have raised the same concern. So we're working with a lot of local community groups, local organizations, youth organizations, to ensure that not only are they mobilized to vote, but majorly to ensure that we promote peace in this election. There will only be election, and people will only be able to choose leaders of their choices when elections are conducted in peaceful atmosphere. So across the states, we are engaging with local communities, faith-based organizations, and critical stakeholders across, particularly the traditional institutions, to ensure that we do not allow the will of the politicians to manipulate the already existing peace across these various communities, across the states where elections will be held.
Mr. Olufemi Lawson, National General Secretary, Campaign for Democracy, thank you so much for joining us on Newsday.
It's my pleasure.